The ballroom fell silent mid-song. The band stopped playing, violins hanging in the air like frozen breath. I stood in my ivory gown, watching my father climb onto the stage, his face hard as stone. "We're not funding this circus," he announced to 200 guests. The words echoed off crystal chandeliers. Vendors gasped. Daniel's mother covered her mouth. My brother Alex laughed first, then my sister Madison joined in, their giggles cutting through shocked whispers. My mother sat perfectly still, pearls gleaming, eyes lowered like she'd practiced this moment. The room spun slowly around me. Cameras flashed. Someone dropped a champagne glass. The sound of shattering felt appropriate. This was my wedding day, the one I'd spent months planning, designing every detail myself, and in 30 seconds my father had turned it into my public execution. I felt heat rising behind my eyes, but I refused to let them see me break. I stood perfectly still while chaos swirled around me. Daniel grabbed my arm, his face pale with confusion. "Lauren, what's happening?" His family stared at my father like he'd gone insane. Maybe he had. Maybe we all had, living in the Price family theater for so long that cruelty looked like normalcy. I pulled my arm free gently and walked to the center of the floor. My father watched me from the stage, waiting for the scene he expected, tears, begging, collapse. I gave him something else. "Understood," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. Just that one word. Then I set down my bouquet on the nearest table, the roses still fresh and hopeful, and walked toward the exit. Every eye followed me. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Daniel called my name, but I didn't turn back. My heels clicked against marble with steady rhythm, each step taking me farther from the life they'd written for me. Outside, rain had started to fall, soft and cold against my bare shoulders. I kicked off my heels in the parking lot and walked barefoot across wet pavement. Thunder rumbled somewhere distant. Behind me, I heard the ballroom doors open, voices spilling out, but nobody followed. They were too shocked, too embarrassed, too relieved it wasn't happening to them. Taillights glowed red through the rain as early guests fled the disaster. I reached the edge of the lot where streetlights barely reached and just stood there, letting rain soak through $5,000 of silk and lace. The dress had been my design, inspired by my grandmother's sketches. Now it clung to me like a second skin of shame. Salt mixed with rain on my face. My phone buzzed with texts I wouldn't read. Somewhere behind me, my life as Lauren Price, the architect daughter, the obedient middle child, was ending. I didn't know what came next. But I knew I'd never say, understood like that again. Growing up in the Price mansion meant learning that love had conditions. Our house sat on 5 acres in the richest part of Cleveland, all marble floors and imported furniture, but it never felt warm. My father, Charles Price, built his fortune developing luxury apartments and shopping centers. Every building bore his name in bronze letters. My mother, Carolyn, played the perfect wife, charity galas, book clubs, never a hair out of place. She taught us that image mattered more than truth. My brother Alex was the crown prince, groomed to inherit the business. Madison was the princess, beautiful and charming, always daddy's favorite. I was the quiet one, the middle child who asked too many questions and dreamed about buildings nobody wanted to fund. At dinner, we discussed investments and social status, never feelings or fears. My father once told me architects were artists, and artists were just dreamers who couldn't pay bills. I learned early that my worth depended on how closely I matched their expectations. I was always invisible in that house, even when standing right in front of them. Alex got praise for every mediocre report card. Madison got applause for simply entering a room. I brought home design awards from school, and my father glanced at them before returning to his newspaper. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, which was her version of enthusiasm. When I told them I wanted to study architecture, my father laughed. "You'll study business and marry well," he said. Buildings are men's work. I did study architecture anyway, but quietly, taking loans to cover what scholarships didn't. They never knew. At family dinners, I sat between my siblings, their laughter filling spaces I couldn't reach. Madison talked about fashion. Alex bragged about deals. I talked about sustainable design, and they changed the subject. The lesson was clear. Being Lauren Price meant being convenient, agreeable, and small, so I shrank myself to fit their frame. Until I couldn't anymore. At 16, I discovered the attic, a dusty space above the garage nobody used. It became my escape, my secret world. I'd hide up there after dinner, surrounded by old furniture and cardboard boxes, sketching houses on scrap paper. The smell of dust and wood glue made me feel real in ways the marble mansion never did. I drew homes with big windows and front porches, places where people actually lived instead of performed. My father called them fantasy houses for poor people. The one time he found my sketches on the kitchen counter. He didn't throw them away like some villains in movies. He just laughed and walked off, which somehow hurt worse. My mother collected them neatly and set them aside, her face carefully neutral. But I kept drawing. In that attic, with pencil and paper, I built worlds where dignity didn't require approval. Those sketches became my first real dreams, the foundation of everything I'd later become. But back then, they were just secrets I kept from people who wouldn't understand. Daniel wasn't my choice, he was my father's. I met him at a business dinner when I was 26, 3 years before the wedding disaster. He worked in finance, came from old money, wore expensive suits that never wrinkled. He was handsome in a practiced way, polite in a hollow way, safe in the most dangerous way. My father approved immediately. "Finally, you're making smart decisions," he said. Daniel proposed after 6 months with a ring his mother had picked out. I said yes because everyone expected it, because saying no felt impossible, because part of me still believed love might grow where duty was planted. I designed our wedding venue myself, a renovated warehouse with exposed brick and string lights, industrial meets elegant. It was the one part of the wedding that felt like mine. Daniel didn't care about details, he just wanted the event, the photos, the next achievement checked off his list. Looking back, we were 2 people performing a marriage, not building one. But I didn't see it then. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. After the canceled wedding, I checked into a roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and cigarette burns on the bedspread. $29 a night, all I could afford once I deleted every banking app connected to my father's accounts. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and looked at myself in the spotted mirror across the room. My mascara had run black rivers down my cheeks. My hair hung in wet tangles. The wedding dress lay crumpled on the floor like a dead thing. I picked up my phone and deleted every social media app without reading the notifications. Hundreds of people had watched my humiliation live. I didn't need to see their pity or judgment. The silence in that room felt enormous, pressing against my ears. But somewhere in that silence, beneath the shame and shock, I felt something else stirring. Not strength yet, more like the absence of chains. I washed my face with cheap motel soap, pulled on the only other clothes I had, jeans and a sweater from my overnight bag, and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. That night became my first moment of freedom, even if it felt like drowning. Finding work proved harder than I'd imagined. My resume said Lauren Price, master's in architecture, graduated top of my class. But my last name carried weight I didn't want. 3 firms turned me down with polite emails about not being the right fit. One interviewer actually said I seemed overqualified while looking at me like I was radioactive. Word had spread about the wedding disaster, the spoiled heiress who couldn't keep her family happy. I burned through my savings in 2 months. Then I found a listing for a drafting position at Dillard Construction, a small company run by a retired builder named Frank Dillard. His office smelled like coffee and sawdust. He looked at my resume, then at me. "You're Charles Price's daughter," he said. My stomach sank. "Yes, but I'm not," he interrupted. "I worked construction in my 20s. Your father's company underpaid workers and cut corners on safety. If you're nothing like him, you're hired." I almost cried right there. 40,000 a year, no benefits, but it was dignity. It was a chance. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "Don't thank me, just show up and work." So I did. My days became long and gray, but honest. I woke at 5 in a basement apartment I'd rented above a mechanic shop. The smell of motor oil seeped through the floor. I ate canned soup and crackers for most meals, saving every dollar. At work, I drafted blueprints, checked measurements, visited construction sites in a borrowed hard hat. Frank taught me things architecture school never did: how wood expands in humidity, how to read soil for foundation work, how to talk to workers with respect instead of commands. My hands got calloused. My boots got muddy. I learned more in those months than in 4 years of university lectures. At night, I'd sketch in my apartment by lamplight, the same way I had in the attic years ago. But now my drawings had purpose. I wasn't just imagining homes, I was learning how to build them. The work exhausted me. Some nights I fell asleep at my desk, pencil still in hand. But the exhaustion felt clean, earned. It wasn't performance or pretending. It was real. And slowly, in concrete and sawdust and honest sweat, I started rebuilding myself. 3 years after the wedding disaster, I opened my own studio. It wasn't much, a corner of a rented warehouse, a used drafting table, one chair, and a sign I made myself. Understood designs. The name came to me one night while I was sketching. That word, the one I'd said in the ballroom, had meant surrender back then. But now it meant something different. It meant I understood my worth without needing their approval. I understood dignity couldn't be given or taken. I understood silence could be strength. Frank helped me file the paperwork, shaking his head with a proud smile. "You're crazy, kid," he said, "but the good kind." I had $300 in my business account and no clients. But I had something more important. I had my name on something I'd built myself. The first week, nobody called. The second week, nothing. By week 3, I started doubting. Then a woman named Patricia walked in, clutching a folder of photos. "My husband died last year," she said quietly. "He built us a cabin. I want to remodel it, keep his memory, but make it livable again. Can you help?" I looked at her tired eyes and hopeful hands. "Yes," I said. "I understand." And I meant it. Patricia's cabin sat 2 hours outside Cleveland, tucked in woods that smelled like pine and rain. The structure was solid but outdated, dark paneling, cramped rooms, a roof that leaked. She showed me photos of her husband standing on the porch, smiling in flannel and work boots. "He built every inch himself," she said. I walked through slowly, taking measurements and notes, but mostly listening. She told me about their life together, his love for woodworking, her love for light and open spaces. Most architects would have gutted the place. I preserved what mattered, the handrail he'd carved, the stone fireplace, the wooden beams, but I opened walls to let sunshine pour through. I added windows that framed the forest. When it was finished 3 months later, Patricia cried standing in her new kitchen. "It feels like him and me together," she whispered. She paid me half what I'd quoted, all she could afford, and I took it gratefully. But something better than money happened. She told her friends. Her friends told their families. Word spread quietly through small circles. There's this architect who listens, who cares, who builds with heart. My phone started ringing. Not with big contracts, but with real people needing real homes. That's how my business grew, one story at a time. Not everyone played fair. 6 months into running Understood Designs, I landed a contract to renovate a community center in a low-income neighborhood. The budget was tight, but I'd learned to work with limitations. I hired a contractor named Victor Shaw based on his bid, lowest price, promised fastest timeline. 2 weeks in, I visited the site and found cheap materials stacked where quality ones should have been. Victor stood near his truck, arms crossed, smirking. "Budget cuts," he said. "Nobody'll notice." I pulled out the contract. "This specifies grade A materials. What you're using won't pass inspection." He laughed. "You gonna tell on me, make a fuss? That's not how this business works, sweetheart." I called the city inspector that afternoon. Victor tried to blame me, saying I'd approved the changes. But I had documentation, every email, every receipt, every specification. The inspector shut down the site until proper materials were used. Victor lost the contract. Word got around that I didn't compromise, didn't cut corners, didn't play dirty even when it cost me time and stress. Some contractors avoided me after that, but the good ones, the honest ones, started calling. Respect isn't given. It's earned through small battles nobody sees. I learned that fighting clean mattered more than winning fast. 4 years after I'd walked out of that ballroom, a local newspaper ran a story. "Former heiress builds homes for the people." The reporter had found me through Patricia, who'd shared her cabin story with pride. They interviewed me in my warehouse office, photographing my drafting table and wall of sketches. I told them the truth, not the dramatic version, just the simple one. I left my family. I started over. I built something honest. When the article came out, I bought 5 copies from the corner store. I cut one out carefully, folded it, and tucked it into my notebook. Not because I was proud, though I was, but because it was proof. Proof that the girl who'd hidden in the attic drawing fantasy houses had actually built real ones. Proof that dignity didn't require marble floors or family approval. Proof that understood could mean something powerful. I didn't frame it or hang it on my wall. I kept it private, a quiet reminder for the days when doubt crept back in. Some victories don't need audiences. Some wins are just for you, whispered in the dark when nobody's watching. That folded newspaper clipping became my armor, thin as paper, strong as stone. 7 years passed quietly. Understood designs grew slowly but steadily. 3 employees, loyal clients, a reputation built on honesty and craft. I moved into a small house I'd renovated myself, nothing fancy but mine. Every floorboard, every coat of paint chosen by me. I still worked long hours. I still ate simple meals, but I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. My family never contacted me. Not once in 7 years. No apology, no curiosity, nothing. I'd seen my father's name in business news occasionally. Expansion here, development there. Madison's boutique got mentioned in lifestyle magazines. Alex ran some division of the company. Their world continued spinning without me and mine without them. Some nights I wondered if they ever thought about that ballroom, about the daughter who'd walked away. Probably not. People like that don't look back. They just move forward, convinced they're always right. Their silence used to hurt like an open wound. But slowly, year by year, it became something else. Not healing exactly, but acceptance. They'd made their choice, I'd made mine. And in the space their absence created, I'd built a life they couldn't touch or diminish. That was enough. Most days, it was more than enough. Then the letter arrived. Official city seal, thick paper, formal language. The Cleveland Heritage Restoration Project invites you to submit a proposal for the historic district redevelopment. $40 million. The largest design commission in Ohio's history, restoring century-old landmarks while modernizing infrastructure. I read it 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table, coffee going cold. This was the kind of project that defined careers, and they'd invited me to pitch. The letter listed other firms competing for the contract. At the bottom, almost casually, one name made my hands shake: Price Development Corporation. My father's company. 7 years of silence, and now we'd face each other across a conference table, competing for the same dream. The irony tasted bitter and sweet at once. I could decline, play it safe, avoid the confrontation. But something Frank had told me years ago echoed in my mind. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better. I pulled out fresh paper and started sketching. Not for revenge, not for vindication, but because those historic buildings deserved someone who'd design with heart, not just profit margins. If that someone happened to be the daughter Charles Price once called a dreamer, so be it. I'd show them what dreamers could build. A proposal meeting happened on a cold November morning in a glass-walled conference room downtown. City officials, historic preservation experts, and private investors filled the seats. I arrived early, carrying my presentation boards myself, refusing to perform wealth I didn't have. Other firms brought teams and expensive displays. I brought honesty. When my turn came, I stood at the front and showed them my vision, preserving the historic facades while creating sustainable, accessible interiors. I spoke about honoring the past without trapping communities there. I showed sketches and budgets and timelines, all realistic, all grounded in actual construction experience. I didn't mention my last name. I didn't need to. My work spoke clearly. When I finished, the room went quiet. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. The historic preservation director leaned forward. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "Someone who understands heritage isn't just about old bricks." I packed up my boards with shaking hands. Price Development would present next week. But for now, in this moment, I'd done my part. I'd shown them that understanding meant more than money. It meant listening, respecting, building with purpose. Walking out into cold November air, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory yet, just certainty. I belonged in that room, and nobody could take that away. Months later, after contracts were signed and work had begun, the city hosted a fundraiser gala to celebrate the Heritage Project. The mayor insisted I attend as the lead architect. I bought a simple black suit, elegant but understated, nothing like the ivory gown I'd worn 7 years ago. Walking into that ballroom felt surreal. Different venue, same type of crowd, wealthy Cleveland, dressed in diamonds and false smiles. Crystal chandeliers, classical music, champagne towers. But this time I wasn't someone's daughter playing dress-up. I was Lauren Price, founder of Understood Designs, architect of the year's biggest project. People approached me with congratulations, respect in their eyes instead of pity or judgment. The mayor introduced me to donors and politicians. A A photographer asked for my picture. And then, across the room near the auction tables, I saw them. My father stood with my mother, both older now, him grayer, her thinner. Madison browsed jewelry displays, her boutique apparently struggling based on the dated dress she wore. Alex stood beside my father, looking uncomfortable in a too-tight suit. They hadn't seen me yet. My heart hammered against my ribs. 7 years and suddenly we were breathing the same air again. I could leave, slip out quietly, but something kept me rooted. Not anger, not revenge, just curiosity. I wanted to see their faces when they finally understood who I'd become. My mother noticed me first. I watched recognition flicker across her face, confusion, then shock, then something that might have been pride or regret, hard to tell with Carolyn Price. She touched my father's arm, whispered something. His head turned slowly. Our eyes met across 30 feet of polished marble. Charles Price, the man who'd humiliated me in front of 200 people, who'd called my dreams a circus, who'd chosen image over his daughter, stood frozen. His face went pale, then red. Madison followed their gaze and her mouth literally fell open. Alex just stared, looking between me and our father like he'd missed something important. I didn't move, didn't wave or smile or acknowledge them beyond that brief eye contact. I simply turned back to the conversation I'd been having with a city councilman about sustainable building materials. Let them process. Let them wonder. Let them feel, just for a moment, what it's like to be invisible. The councilman was asking about timeline expectations when I heard the mayor's voice boom across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." The crowd quieted. My father hadn't stopped staring. "I'd like to introduce the visionary architect behind our heritage project." My stomach tightened. This was it, the reveal without me saying a word. "Please welcome Lauren Price, founder of Understood Designs." The room erupted in applause. Heads turned toward me. A spotlight found my face. I walked to the small stage, my heels clicking with confidence I'd earned through 7 years of canned soup and sawdust. Behind me, I heard gasps, whispers. Someone said, "That's Charles Price's daughter." Another voice, "I thought she disappeared." I reached the microphone and looked out at the crowd. My family stood together near the back, my father's face frozen in disbelief, my mother's hand over her mouth, tears forming. Madison looked like she'd seen a ghost. Alex seemed genuinely confused. For a moment, I let myself feel it, the vindication, the justice, the poetry of standing where I'd once fallen. Then I let it go. This wasn't about them anymore. 7 years ago, I began, my voice steady, someone told me that architects were just dreamers who couldn't pay bills. That real success meant money and status, not passion or purpose. I paused. My father's face was stone. But I learned that real success is building something honest. It's creating spaces where people live, not just exist. It's understanding that dignity doesn't come from approval. I looked directly at my family. Sometimes the things we lose make room for who we're meant to become. The room applauded. I stepped down, calm washing over me like cool water. Not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes from being free. After the speeches and formal events ended, I walked outside for air. The night was cold, stars hidden behind city lights. I leaned against the building's stone wall and just breathed. Behind me, the door opened. I tensed, expecting reporters or networking professionals. Instead, I heard her voice. "Lauren!" My mother stood in the doorway, pearls still perfect, but her face showing cracks I'd never seen before. 7 years of silence, and now she wanted to talk. "What do you want?" I asked, not unkindly, just honestly. She stepped closer, wrapping her coat tighter. I wanted to say, "What you built, it's beautiful." I waited. She continued, "Your father didn't know. When we saw your name, he couldn't believe. That I succeeded without him." I finished. She winced. "We made mistakes, Lauren, with you, with everything." Behind her, through the glass doors, I could see my father standing rigid, watching us. Alex and Madison hung back, uncertain. Part of me wanted to rage, to list every wound, every silent dinner, every dismissed dream. But standing there in the cold, I realized I didn't need that. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. "But I'm not looking for apologies or reconciliation. I'm just looking forward." Her eyes glistened. "I understand." "Do you?" I asked gently. She started to answer, then stopped. After a moment, she whispered, "I'm proud of you." Then she turned and walked back inside, leaving me alone with the night and my own quiet heart. I didn't go back inside. Instead, I walked to my car, a modest sedan I'd bought used 4 years ago. It still ran perfectly. The parking lot was half empty, fancy cars gleaming under streetlights. I sat in the driver's seat and just existed for a while, letting the night settle around me. My phone buzzed. Text from Frank. Heard your speech was killer. Proud of you, kid. I smiled. Found family, I'd learned, mattered more than blood. Another text, this one from Patricia, the widow with the cabin. Saw you on the news, you're amazing. Dozens of messages from clients, employees, people whose homes I'd designed with care. My family's silence used to feel like abandonment. But sitting in that car, reading words from people who actually knew me, I realized I'd built something better. Community, respect, purpose. Those couldn't be canceled in a ballroom or stolen by cruelty. I started the engine. The radio played something soft and instrumental. I glanced at the passenger seat, empty like it had been for 7 years. Daniel had left me the day after the wedding disaster, sending a single text. I can't handle this drama. I'd never looked for another relationship. Some people called that sad. I called it selective. The seat beside me stayed empty by choice, not by wound. And honestly, I was okay with that. I drove home through quiet streets, the city lights blurring past, my future uncertain but finally mine. Completely, undeniably mine. My office became my sanctuary. Late that night, after the gala, I stood in the warehouse space I'd transformed over 7 years. The drafting table where I'd sketched Patricia's cabin. The wall where I'd pinned my first business card. And there, in a small frame I'd added recently, my old attic sketches from age 16. The fantasy houses my father had mocked, the dreams he'd called worthless. I'd built every single one of them. Not literally. The addresses and clients were different. But every design principle, every architectural choice came from those teenage drawings. The girl hiding in the dust and wood glue had known something the mansion's marble floors couldn't teach her. That real homes were built with heart, not money. I touched the frame gently. We did it, I whispered to my younger self. They were wrong. Outside, Cleveland slept under winter stars. Inside my small office, surrounded by blueprints and coffee cups and honest work, I felt complete. Not happy in some fairy tale way, not victorious like a movie ending, just complete, whole, like every scattered piece of me had finally come home. I'd lost my family, my fiancé, my inheritance, my social standing. But I'd gained something irreplaceable, myself. The version of me that existed without their approval, without their judgment, without their circus. Tomorrow I'd start work on the Heritage Project. Next week, 3 new clients were coming in. Next month, my business would celebrate its 7th anniversary. But tonight, I just stood in my office and let myself feel the weight of freedom. It was heavy and light at once, lonely and full, bitter and sweet. It was mine. The weeks that followed were busy and quiet at once. Construction began on the Heritage Project. I spent days at historic sites, checking measurements, consulting with preservation experts, making sure every detail honored the building's stories. My father's company had underbid, but lost because their proposal focused on profit over preservation. I heard through industry channels that Charles Price had been furious, ranting about nepotism and unfair advantages. The irony made me laugh. 7 years ago, nepotism had been his favorite tool. Now that it didn't serve him, suddenly it was unfair. I didn't gloat, didn't send messages or make public statements. I just worked. Let my buildings speak. Let my reputation grow. Madison's boutique closed 3 months after the gala. Alex left the family business to start his own firm, apparently tired of living in our father's shadow. My mother sent one email. I hope you're well. We think of you. I read it twice, then archived it without responding. Not from cruelty, but from boundary. Some doors once closed should stay that way. Frank retired, handing me a bottle of whiskey and a handshake at his farewell party. You turned out okay, kid, he said gruffly. Better than okay, I corrected, and he laughed. Life continued its steady rhythm. Work, home, sketches, sleep. Simple, honest mine. Some people found it boring. I found it beautiful. The circus my father had mocked was actually peace, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you told me 7 years ago, standing barefoot in that parking lot with rain soaking through my wedding dress, that I'd be here, successful, respected, free, I wouldn't have believed you. The pain felt too sharp, the humiliation too deep. But here's what I learned. Rock bottom has a solid foundation. You can build on it. When my dad said, "We're not funding this circus," he thought he was ending my story, canceling my dreams, putting me in my place. But that moment, that word, understood, became my beginning. Not my surrender, but my declaration. I understood I didn't need their funding. I understood my worth wasn't measured in their approval. I understood silence could be strength and solitude could be peace. When their world fell apart, business struggles, family fractures, reputations crumbling, they finally understood too. Not me, but the cost of control. The price of cruelty, the weight of choosing image over love. I don't hate them anymore. Hate requires energy I'd rather spend on blueprints and honest work. I don't miss them either. You can't miss what was never really there. But sometimes, late at night in my small house, I think about that ballroom. 200 witnesses to my humiliation. And I smile, because every single one of them watched me walk out with dignity intact. And 7 years later, they watched me walk back in on my own terms, built from sawdust and canned soup and refused surrender. The circus, it turned out, was never mine. It was theirs, the performance, the pretending, the hollow applause. I just walked away from the tent and built something real under open sky. And when the show collapsed, I was already home. Finally, peacefully, completely home. If you love this story, kindly subscribe to this channel and stay tuned as I bring more interesting stories to you.